Admiral Jake Morrison looked out the viewport of his Imperial cruiser as it moved through the Sol system. He had done this inspection many times before and expected nothing new from the primitive humans who lived here. The Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, and humans were just another weak species that paid their taxes and stayed quiet. Morrison checked his datapad and saw the usual reports about farming and basic mining operations. Earth looked peaceful and backward, just like it always did, far below the surface of what appeared to be Earth's natural moon. Commander Lisa Harper walked through corridors that should not have existed. The moon looked normal from space, but inside it was completely hollow. For over 100 years, humans had been digging and building in secret. Massive machines carved out rock, while others built the framework of something the Empire would never expect. Lisa stopped at a viewing window and watched thousands of workers installing the final pieces of weapon systems that were larger than most. Imperial ships thought the construction project was so big that it needed 3 locations to complete. Lisa knew that similar work was happening on Mars, where the Empire thought humans were just digging for basic metals. The red planet's surface looked unchanged, but underneath lay shipyards that could build vessels, larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. In the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, entire small planets had been hollowed out and turned into construction facilities. The Empire's sensors saw normal mining operations and never looked deeper. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez checked the power systems one more time. The artificial gravity generators hummed quietly as they created Earth-normal conditions throughout the massive hollow space inside the moon. These generators were based on human science that had developed along completely different lines from Imperial technology. While the Empire focused on making bigger and more obvious displays of power, humans had spent centuries learning how to hide their true capabilities. The quantum processors that controlled the ship's systems were smaller and more efficient than anything the Empire used, and they produced almost no energy signature that sensors could detect. Dr. Amy Thompson finished her final calculations at her computer station. She had been working on the planetary defense grid for the past 10 years. What looked like a simple agricultural world to Imperial inspectors was actually the command center for the largest military project in galactic history. 3 ships the size of small planets were almost ready, and the Empire had no idea they existed. Amy smiled as she thought about how blind the Empire had become in their arrogance. They saw what they expected to see and never looked for what might be hidden. The first ship was built inside Earth's moon and was nearly complete. Every system had been tested and retested in secret. The fusion reactors that powered it were based on designs that improved on basic Imperial technology, but used completely different principles. The weapon systems were unlike anything the Empire had ever encountered. Instead of the energy beams that Imperial ships used, human weapons focused on kinetic projectiles that could punch through any known shield system. The ship also carried gravitational manipulation devices that could disable enemy vessels without destroying them completely. The second ship was hidden inside Jupiter's moon Europa. From space, it looked like a frozen ice world, but inside the ice lay a warship even larger than the one in Earth's moon. Captain Greg Adams had supervised its construction for the past 5 years. He was officially listed as a minor agricultural coordinator, but in reality, he was one of humanity's best military strategists. The Europa ships specialized in long-range operations and could travel faster than most Imperial vessels while remaining completely invisible to their sensors. The third ship was the largest of all and was built inside Saturn's moon Titan. Commander Katie Bell had overseen its final construction phases. Titan appeared to be nothing more than a cold moon with a thick atmosphere, but it housed weapon systems that could destroy entire Imperial fleets. The ship's armor was made from materials that the Empire had never discovered, and its shields operated on quantum principles that made Imperial weapons almost useless against it. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Wright coordinated communications between all three construction sites. His office was located in what appeared to be a small research station in the asteroid belt, but was actually the central command facility for the entire project. Steve had been sending false reports to the Empire for decades, making sure they saw only boring mining data and basic scientific research. The real research involved developing new types of faster-than-light travel that left no trace for Imperial sensors to follow. Dr. Jennifer Moore worked on the final communication systems that would link all three ships when the time came to reveal them. Her systems used quantum entanglement to send messages instantly across any distance without the Empire being able to intercept or detect them. The technology was far beyond anything the Empire possessed and would give humanity a huge advantage when the secret was finally revealed. The workers who built these massive ships were all volunteers who understood the importance of complete secrecy. They lived inside the hidden facilities and had no contact with the outside world. Their families believed they were working on deep space mining projects or scientific research stations. The security was so tight that not even other humans on Earth knew what was really happening inside their own moon. Admiral Morrison finished his inspection and prepared to file his standard report. Earth remained a Class 7 civilization with no military capabilities worth mentioning. The humans continued to pay their taxes and caused no trouble for the Empire. He never suspected that beneath his very sensors lay weapons that could destroy his entire fleet in minutes. The Empire's confidence in their own superiority had made them blind to the possibility that any primitive species could pose a real threat. As Morrison's ship left the Sol system, Lisa Harper watched it go from her command center deep inside the moon. Soon the Empire would learn that their 3,000-year reign was about to end. Humanity had been patient and careful, but they were almost ready to step out of the shadows and show the galaxy what they had really been building all these years. The message from Imperial Central Command arrived on a routine transport ship that landed at Earth's single spaceport. Captain Greg Adams watched the Imperial courier deliver the official documents to what appeared to be Earth's colonial government office. The building looked simple and basic, just like everything else the Empire expected to see on primitive worlds. Greg wore the uniform of a minor administrative officer and acted nervous around the Imperial messenger, stumbling over basic galactic protocols and apologizing for humanity's poor facilities. Inside the sealed envelope was a standard expansion decree that had been sent to thousands of worlds across the Outer Rim territories. The Empire was preparing for a major campaign against the Zephyrian Alliance, a group of independent worlds that had refused to submit to Imperial rule. Every subject world was required to contribute ships and personnel to the war effort. Earth's quota was modest compared to more developed planets, but the Empire expected complete compliance from all their subjects. Greg read the requirements carefully while maintaining his act of being a confused colonial bureaucrat. Earth was ordered to provide 12 patrol vessels and 300 volunteers within 60 standard days. The ships had to be spaceworthy and armed with basic weapons, though the Empire expected nothing impressive from such a backward world. The personnel would serve as support troops, far from any real fighting, where their primitive training might cause problems for professional Imperial forces. Deep beneath the surface, Commander Lisa Harper received Greg's coded transmission about the Imperial demands. The timing was actually perfect for humanity's plans. The Empire was gathering their fleets for a massive offensive that would concentrate most of their military power at the Zephyrian border. This would leave the rest of Imperial space with reduced defenses and give humanity the opportunity they had been waiting for. Lisa walked through the command center inside the hollowed moon and watched the final preparations taking place. The first planetary warship was complete and ready for activation. Its weapons systems had been tested in secret, using remote asteroids as targets, and the results had exceeded all expectations. The ship could accelerate to incredible speeds, despite its enormous size, and its stealth systems made it invisible to any known sensor technology. On Europa, Commander Katie Bell supervised the crew training exercises for the second planetary warship. The ship was slightly smaller than the one hidden in Earth's moon, but carried more advanced, long-range weapons. Katie had been selected for command because of her experience with deep space operations and her ability to make quick tactical decisions. Her crew of 5,000 had been training for this moment for over 10 years, practicing battle scenarios in perfect secrecy. The third ship inside Titan was the largest and most powerful of all. Lieutenant Marcus Davis served as its tactical officer and had spent months learning the capabilities of weapons that could destroy entire Imperial battle groups. The ship's main guns used gravitational manipulation to create projectiles that traveled at nearly the speed of light. Its defensive systems could generate energy fields that would absorb and redirect Imperial weapons back at their own ships. Patricia Williams put the finishing touches on the unique human weapon systems that would give them such an advantage over Imperial technology. While the Empire relied on energy beams that could be blocked by conventional shields, human weapons used solid projectiles accelerated to incredible velocities. These kinetic weapons could penetrate any known defensive system and cause devastating damage to enemy ships. The humans had also developed quantum disruption fields that could disable Imperial electronics without warning. Steve Wright coordinated the complex logistics of moving 3 planet-sized ships into position without being detected. The vessels would need to reach the edge of the solar system and wait for the right moment to reveal themselves. Each ship had to follow a carefully calculated course that would appear to be natural orbital mechanics to any observers. The movement would take several weeks to complete, but Imperial sensors would see nothing unusual. Meanwhile, Greg Adams prepared for his journey to Imperial Station Nexus 7, where Earth's contribution to the war effort would be inspected and assigned to support duties. He would command the 12 outdated patrol vessels that humanity was officially contributing, ships that were deliberately designed to look primitive and ineffective. His crew of 300 volunteers were all experienced military personnel, but they would act like nervous civilians who had never seen real combat. The patrol vessels themselves were part of humanity's deception. They appeared to be cobbled together from salvaged parts and basic technology, but they contained hidden systems that could communicate with the planetary warships when needed. Their weapons were intentionally weak, and their armor looked makeshift. Exactly what the Empire expected from a primitive world trying to meet its military obligations. Dr. Jennifer Moore completed the final tests on the quantum communication network that would coordinate all human forces during the coming conflict. The system used principles that the Empire had never discovered and could not intercept or jam. When the time came to drop their disguises, all 3 planetary warships would receive their orders simultaneously and act as a coordinated fleet despite being spread across multiple star systems. As the deadline for the Imperial summons approached, humanity made their final preparations. The Empire's war against the Zephyrian Alliance would begin soon, and most Imperial fleets would be committed to that distant conflict. This would give humanity the perfect opportunity to reveal their true capabilities and change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Morrison prepared to lead his own battle group to the Zephyrian front, confident that the Empire's superior technology and numbers would quickly crush the rebellion. He had no idea that the real threat to Imperial dominance was hidden right under his nose in a system he considered too primitive to worry about. The Empire's arrogance and blind confidence in their own superiority was about to become their greatest weakness. Captain Greg Adams arrived at Imperial Station Nexus 7 with humanity's pathetic contribution to the Great War effort. His fleet of 12 patrol vessels looked exactly as primitive as the Empire expected. The ships had rust stains painted on their hulls and deliberately mismatched weapon systems that appeared to have been salvaged from different sources. Greg himself wore an ill-fitting uniform and carried a datapad that he pretended to have trouble operating whenever Imperial officers were watching. Admiral Morrison barely glanced at the human ships as they docked at the station's outer ring. The vessels were so obviously inferior that they posed no threat to anyone, which made them perfect for the rear guard duties he had planned. Morrison's attention was focused on preparing the massive Imperial fleet that would soon depart for the Zephyrian border. Over 2,000 warships from across the Empire were gathering for what would surely be the final campaign against the rebellious alliance. Worlds. Greg played his role perfectly during the inspection of his vessels and crew. He stammered when asked technical questions about his ship's capabilities and had to ask his subordinates for help with basic military procedures. The Imperial inspectors quickly grew bored with the primitive humans and approved them for support duties without conducting a thorough examination. If they had looked more carefully, they might have noticed that the human crew members moved with military precision when they thought no one was watching. Back in the Sol system, the real preparation for war was reaching its final phase. Commander Lisa Harper initiated the movement protocols for the first planetary warship. Deep inside what appeared to be Earth's moon, massive engines came online for the first time at full power. The ship began to accelerate slowly away from Earth, following a trajectory that would appear to be a natural orbital adjustment caused by gravitational influences from the outer planets. The movement was so gradual that it would take weeks for the ship to reach its destination at the edge of the solar system. Imperial sensors detected the slight change in the moon's orbit, but attributed it to normal celestial mechanics. The Empire's scientists had long ago calculated the orbits of all major bodies in human space and saw nothing unusual in minor variations that occurred over time. Lieutenant Marcus Davis monitored Imperial communication networks from his hidden station in the asteroid belt. The Empire's military commanders were sending constant updates about fleet positions and battle plans for the Zephyrian campaign. Their confidence was absolute, and they discussed their strategy openly on communication channels they believed were completely secure. Marcus recorded every transmission, gathering intelligence that would prove invaluable when humanity finally revealed itself. The Imperial war plan was typically straightforward and relied on overwhelming force to crush all resistance. Admiral Morrison would lead the main attack fleet directly against the Zephyrian capital world, while smaller forces struck at military installations throughout Alliance space. The Empire expected total victory within 6 months, followed by the usual process of occupation and integration of the defeated worlds into their expanding domain. Commander Katie Bell supervised the departure of the second planetary warship from its hiding place inside Europa. The ice moon's surface remained completely unchanged, while the massive vessel inside began its own slow journey toward the system's outer reaches. Katie had spent years studying Imperial battle tactics and knew exactly how they would deploy their forces against the Zephyrian alliance. The Empire's predictable strategies would become a fatal weakness when they faced an enemy they had never imagined could exist. Dr. Patricia Williams completed the final calibration of the weapon systems aboard all 3 planetary ships. The kinetic projectile cannons were now capable of accelerating solid metal slugs to 90% of light speed, giving them enough energy to punch through the heaviest Imperial armor. The gravitational manipulation devices could create localized distortions in space, time that would tear enemy ships apart or disable their engines without warning. The third planetary warship began its movement from Titan's orbit, following the same careful trajectory as its sister ships. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Wright coordinated all 3 vessels from his command center, ensuring that their movements appeared random and unconnected to any outside observer. The Empire's sensor networks registered minor orbital variations among several bodies in the Sol system, but found no pattern that would suggest coordinated activity. As the Imperial fleet prepared for departure from Nexus 7, Greg Adams received his final assignment orders. His small human contingent would be stationed at Supply Depot Gamma 12, a remote facility that supported Imperial operations along the Zephyrian border. The depot was far from any expected combat zones and was considered a safe assignment for unreliable auxiliary forces. Greg accepted the orders with apparent relief, playing the part of a nervous civilian who was grateful to avoid real fighting. The Imperial departure was a magnificent display of military power that was meant to intimidate any potential enemies. Over 2,000 warships formed into precise battle formations and jumped to hyperspace in coordinated waves. Each ship was larger and more heavily armed than anything the rebels possessed, and their combined firepower could reduce entire worlds. To rebel, Admiral Morrison led from his flagship, confident that this would be another easy victory for the Empire. With the Imperial fleet committed to the distant war, human space was left with only token patrol forces and automated monitoring stations. The Empire had never considered the possibility that their most primitive subjects might pose any threat, so they saw no need to maintain strong defensive positions in the Sol system. This oversight would prove to be a fatal mistake in their long history of galactic dominance. Dr. Jennifer Moore activated the final communication protocols that would link all human forces when the time came for action. The quantum entanglement network was now fully operational and could coordinate the 3 planetary warships with ground forces throughout human space. When humanity finally dropped their disguise, every element of their hidden military would act as a single coordinated force. The stage was now set for the revelation that would change galactic history. The Empire's greatest fleet was committed to a distant war while their most dangerous enemies prepared to strike from a direction they would never expect. Humanity had been patient for over a century, but their moment of truth was finally approaching. The Zephyrian War began exactly as the Empire had planned. Admiral Morrison's massive fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Alliance territory and immediately began their systematic assault on rebel positions. The first battles went smoothly, with Imperial forces overwhelming the smaller Zephyrian ships through sheer numbers and superior firepower. Morrison was confident that the war would end within months, just as every previous Imperial campaign had concluded with total victory. Captain Greg Adams and his small human contingent arrived at Supply Depot Gamma 12 as ordered. The facility was a collection of storage warehouses and automated systems that kept Imperial forces supplied with ammunition, fuel, and replacement parts. Greg's 12 patrol vessels were assigned to routine security patrols around the depot, well away from any actual fighting. The Imperial officers in charge barely acknowledged the humans, treating them as a minor inconvenience that had to be tolerated. At precisely 0300 hours Galactic Standard Time, Commander Lisa Harper received the activation codes that humanity had been waiting for. Deep inside what had appeared to be Earth's moon, she initiated the final transformation sequence that would reveal their greatest secret to the galaxy. Massive sections of the artificial surface began to crack and peel away like the petals of an enormous flower opening. Beneath the disguise lay the gleaming hull of a warship over 2,000 kilometers in diameter. The transformation was visible to every sensor in the Sol system. Imperial monitoring stations that had recorded nothing but routine orbital data for decades suddenly registered energy readings that should have been impossible. The object that their computers had classified as Earth's natural satellite was revealing itself to be something that defied every assumption about human technological capabilities. Commander Katie Bell, aboard the second planetary ship, initiated her own transformation sequence. The ice covering Europa's surface cracked and fell away in massive chunks, revealing another impossibly large warship that dwarfed the Imperial vessels that had inspected the system so many times. The ship's weapon systems came online with energy, signatures that exceeded anything in Imperial databases. The third ship hidden inside, Titan, completed its own dramatic revelation. Lieutenant Marcus Davis watched as the moon's thick atmosphere was blown away by the emerging vessel's energy field. The largest of the 3 planetary warships stood revealed, its hull studded with weapon systems that could destroy entire fleets. The ship's main guns were larger than most Imperial space stations and carried enough firepower to reduce planets to asteroids. Imperial communication networks across 12 systems suddenly erupted with panicked reports from sensor operators, who could not believe what they were seeing. 3 objects the size of small planets had appeared from nowhere in the Sol system, each one radiating enough energy to power an entire Imperial sector fleet. The sensor readings were so far beyond normal parameters that many operators initially assumed their equipment was malfunctioning. Admiral Morrison received the first reports while directing an assault on a Zephyrian defense station. His initial reaction was disbelief, followed by growing horror as additional confirmations arrived from multiple sources. 3 massive unknown vessels had somehow materialized in what should have been the most primitive system in Imperial space. The energy signatures indicated weapons and defensive systems that surpassed anything the Empire possessed. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Wright activated the quantum communication array and sent a single message to every Imperial receiver within 50 light years. The transmission was sent simultaneously from all 3 planetary ships using communication technology that the Empire had never encountered. The message was simple and direct, but it would forever change the balance of power in the galaxy. It read, "This is the human defense fleet. The age of Imperial dominance is over." The first Imperial ships to respond to the crisis were a patrol squadron that had been conducting routine inspections of nearby systems. Commander Tony Martinez aboard the Europa ship detected their approach and decided to demonstrate humanity's new capabilities. The 12 Imperial vessels were state-of-the-art cruisers with enough firepower to subjugate most worlds, but they were nothing compared to what they now faced. The engagement lasted exactly 17 minutes. Commander Martinez used gravitational pulse weapons to disable the Imperial ships' engines, while kinetic bombardment reduced their hulls to scrap metal. The weapons operated on principles that Imperial science had never discovered, making their energy shields and armor completely ineffective. Only Admiral Morrison's former flagship escaped, heavily damaged and broadcasting warnings about humanity's impossible capabilities. Similar demonstrations of power occurred throughout Imperial space as the 3 planetary ships moved to strategic positions. The Europa ship appeared at the Rigel system and single-handedly liberated 6 enslaved worlds that had been under Imperial control for centuries. The massive vessel's presence alone was enough to convince local Imperial forces to surrender, rather than face destruction. The Titan ship struck at the Vega sector, where an Imperial shipyard complex had been terrorizing the local population for decades. The facility was one of the Empire's largest military construction centers, protected by orbital defense platforms and an entire battle fleet. The human warship destroyed the entire complex in less than an hour, using weapons that the Imperial defenders could not even detect until it was too late. Captain Greg Adams received new orders from Earth Command through the hidden quantum communication system. His role as a confused colonial administrator was no longer necessary. He was promoted to admiral and placed in command of the newly revealed human space navy, which included not only the 3 planetary warships, but dozens of conventional vessels that had been hidden throughout human space. The Zephyrian Alliance immediately seized the opportunity presented by the Empire's sudden crisis. Alliance forces launched renewed offensives against weakened Imperial positions, while their own hidden allies among other subjugated species began coordinated rebellions. The Empire found itself fighting on multiple fronts against enemies they had dismissed as irrelevant for millennia. Throughout the galaxy, species that had lived under Imperial oppression for generations suddenly saw hope for freedom. The impossible had happened. Someone had successfully challenged the Empire's military supremacy and proven that their technological advantage was not absolute. Rebellion spread from system to system as the news of humanity's revelation reached every corner of Imperial space. The Empire's carefully maintained image of invincibility crumbled as reports flooded in about the devastating effectiveness of human weapons. Imperial commanders who had never known defeat found themselves facing an enemy that could destroy their most powerful ships without taking significant damage in return. The 3 planetary warships moved through Imperial space like forces of nature, appearing wherever the Empire's grip was strongest and breaking it with overwhelming displays of superior technology. The war's outcome was never truly in doubt after the planetary warships revealed themselves to the galaxy. Admiral Norrison's confidence in Imperial superiority crumbled as report after report arrived describing impossible defeats at the hands of human forces. The Empire's greatest strength had always been their ability to overwhelm opponents through superior numbers and technology. But against enemies who operated from platforms the size of worlds, their traditional advantages became meaningless. Within 6 months of the revelation, Imperial forces had been driven back to their core systems. The 3 human planetary warships appeared wherever Imperial resistance was strongest, systematically dismantling the infrastructure that had supported galactic tyranny for 3,000 years. Commander Lisa Harper's ship destroyed the massive fortress complex at Proxima Centauri that had served as the Empire's forward command center for the outer territories. The Zephyrian Alliance found themselves with unexpected allies as dozens of previously subjugated species declared their independence from Imperial rule. The rebellion that had started as a localized conflict expanded into a galaxy-wide revolution against the old order. Species that had been forced to serve the Empire for centuries suddenly had the courage to fight back, knowing that humanity's powerful ships would support any world that stood against oppression. Admiral Greg Adams commanded the human space navy. From his flagship, one of the conventional vessels that had been hidden among Earth's asteroid mining operations, his fleet had grown to include ships from dozens of liberated worlds, all flying under the banner of the new Galactic Freedom Alliance. The humans provided the overwhelming firepower needed to break Imperial strongholds, while their allies contributed knowledge of local conditions and Imperial weak points. Commander Katie Bell led a joint task force that liberated the slave worlds of the Orion sector. Her ship's weapons could disable Imperial defenses without destroying the planets they were supposed to protect, allowing liberation forces to land safely and free millions of beings who had lived under Imperial rule for generations. The sight of the massive human warship in orbit became a symbol of hope for oppressed peoples. Throughout the galaxy, the Empire's response to the crisis revealed just how dependent they had become on fear and intimidation to maintain control. When their technological superiority was challenged by an enemy they could not defeat, their entire system began to collapse from within. Imperial governors abandoned their posts and fled toward the core worlds, while local populations rose up against the remaining occupation forces. Lieutenant Marcus Davis coordinated intelligence operations that revealed the full extent of Imperial weakness. The Empire's military had grown complacent during their long period of unchallenged dominance, and their forces were not prepared to fight a real war against a capable opponent. Most Imperial commanders had never faced serious resistance and did not know how to adapt their tactics when their usual advantages were neutralized. Dr. Patricia Williams continued to improve the human weapon systems that had proven so devastatingly effective against Imperial technology. The kinetic projectile weapons were refined to achieve even higher velocities, while the gravitational manipulation devices were modified to disable entire fleets simultaneously. The Empire's energy-based weapons and shield systems were completely inadequate against human technology that operated on fundamentally different principles. The final phase of the war began when all 3 planetary warships converged on the Imperial capital system. The Emperor himself, who had ruled for over 2 centuries through fear and technological superiority, watched in horror as vessels that dwarfed his most powerful battleships took up positions around his throne world. The Imperial fleet that defended the capital was the most advanced in the galaxy, but it was still no match for weapons that could manipulate gravity itself. The siege of the Imperial capital lasted only 3 days. Commander Tony Martinez demonstrated the power of human technology by using gravitational fields to lift an entire Imperial battle station out of orbit and deposit it gently on the planet's surface without harming the crew inside. The message was clear. Humanity could destroy the Empire completely, but they were offering the chance for a negotiated surrender instead of total annihilation. Faced with certain destruction, the Emperor agreed to negotiate a peace treaty that would reshape the political structure of the entire galaxy. The Empire would remain intact, but greatly reduced in size, limited to their original core systems, and forbidden from expanding their territory or subjugating other species. The thousands of worlds that had been under Imperial control for millennia were granted immediate independence. Admiral Adams represented humanity during the peace negotiations, but he made it clear that the treaty was not just between humans and the Empire. The new Galactic Freedom Alliance included representatives from every species that had suffered under Imperial rule, and their voices would be heard in determining the future structure of galactic civilization. The age of single-species domination was ending, replaced by a system based on cooperation and mutual respect. The treaty established humanity as the primary guarantor of galactic peace, with the 3 planetary warships serving as a deterrent against any future attempts at conquest or oppression. The ships would patrol the galaxy's trade routes and respond to any threats against the independence of member worlds. The mere knowledge of their existence would prevent most conflicts from escalating to the point where military intervention became necessary. Dr. Jennifer Moore expanded the quantum communication network to include all member worlds of the new alliance. The system would allow instant communication across any distance, making it impossible for aggressive powers to operate in secret or coordinate surprise attacks. The technology gave smaller worlds the ability to call for help immediately if they were threatened, ensuring that no species would face conquest alone. The transformation of galactic society was not immediate, but the changes were irreversible. Species that had been enemies under Imperial rule began to cooperate as equals, sharing technology and resources in ways that had been impossible under the old system. Trade flourished between worlds that had been cut off from each other by Imperial restrictions, leading to an unprecedented period of economic growth and cultural exchange. Commander Bell stood on the observation deck of her ship and watched as human colonists established new settlements on worlds that had been liberated from Imperial control. The galaxy was entering a new age of freedom and prosperity, but the price of that freedom was eternal vigilance. The 3 planetary warships would continue their patrols, ready to respond to any threat against the peace they had helped to create. Empire had indeed been blind to humanity's true capabilities, seeing only what they expected to see from a primitive species. In their arrogance, they had never imagined that their most overlooked subjects were capable of such technological achievement and strategic deception. The galaxy would never be the same, and humanity had taken its place among the stars, not as conquerors, but as protectors of freedom for all who chose to stand against tyranny.